a chat with, well-known former union boss on the island, Bernard Moffatt. And Bernie, I've asked you to come up here because you've been quite understandably, as a former union man, very vocal, if that's the right word, on social media in any case, with views about what you've heard from each side and overall impressions of the current communication workers union, postal workers strike. Just sum up, if you can, some of the thoughts you've had, because there have been plenty, haven't there?
Yeah, well, I've thank you first for being diplomatic. I've been ranting and raving on social media, but I mean, that's one of the luxuries you can afford yourself on social media, and particularly if you're unattached in terms of where you are in an argument, you can just express your point of view. But I don't underestimate the seriousness of this dispute. I think it's one of the most serious disputes that's occurred on the island, and I was involved in very many. And I'm conscious as well that there's not just CWU members involved. Any workplace is the sum of all the people who work there, right up to Simon Neen, I understand, who's the chief executive. All the people have got a stake in getting an outcome. And what I suppose worries me about this dispute is it's becoming increasingly polarised as it goes on, whereas in most disputes you would see people drifting towards each other. In this, they seem to be going away from each other, and that's a bad thing.
All strikes, though, there's usually smoke and mirrors, aren't there? And we've had plenty of that in the past week.
And strikes evolved as well over the years. I mean, we used to, when I was a lay official before I became the full-time official for the T&G, we used to adopt the traditional approach. We went out on strike and stayed out on strike, and sometimes it was a week. In one instance, over Christmas as well, 4 weeks, just over 4 weeks. But later on, we went for this kind of sporadic action as well. And I'm bound to say that towards the end of my period in the T&G, and I retired when it became Unite in 2007, and then I worked on for a bit with the branch till 2012. By that time, industrial relations were fairly settled. What astonished me, and in fact, what prompted me to email you the comment, was the Treasury Minister's intervention when he suggested that these sort of disputes could be orchestrated from the UK and they could be working to an agenda from the UK. And I thought, well, gosh, things have changed. Because
you used to always defend that when that was put to you.
Yeah, we took the stance that the Isle of Man was a distinct entity, and the union always respected that. And I'll give you a couple of very brief examples. When we took a stance here in the branch against Sellafield over there, in which our union at that time, the TGWU, had a big membership, not just in the nuclear establishment there, but in the nuclear industry across the UK. They accepted our right to do that, and there were complaints from branches in the UK, and at one point it seemed that I might lose my job over that particular stance, but the union regionally and nationally supported the idea that the Isle of Man took its position on these matters. And later on, when the merger with Unite occurred, I recall, and I think I did an interview with Manx Radio at the time, I recall Derek Simpson, the joint General Secretary, because when the two unions, Amicus and T&G, merged, they were joint General Secretaries for a period. He attacked the Isle of Man as a financial centre. And at that time, a big bulk of the Amicus people who'd come across with the Unite merger were banking workers in the island. And I took him to task, and there was absolutely no reaction from the union at all. The union accepted that the stance, the culture, the traditions of particular areas were specific to that area. And that's very much the same today. I mean, I'm not just talking about the union I had experience of. My daughter, Angela, has gone from prospecting the Isle of Man here to set up the union in Northern Ireland, where there is already a very substantial core membership. And she's on a learning curve there because, of course, the way the union approaches things there has to be specific to that area and its culture and sensitivities.
So you're saying that the Treasury Ministers' comments were out of order?
Well, I don't know. I mean, one of the things I heard Terry Pullinger say was he thought there were a lot of politics at play in this.
But well, there have been, haven't there? We've had the Department of Enterprise that sponsors the Post Office almost ignored. All 4 members spoke out during the Post Office debate in Tynwald.
That is astonishing, to be perfectly blunt. I wouldn't expect a Treasury Minister to be involved in a dispute like this. I mean, I can recall Alan Bell when he was Treasury Minister, and I was trying to Shanghai him into a Whitley Council dispute, saying, I've got enough weights on my shoulders without getting involved in Whitley Council. And, you know, I was sent off with a flea in my ear. But
is Coleman, do you feel, pulling the strings a little bit in this dispute?
I can't even see that because, of course, Lawrence Skelly is in Coleman. I don't see there's anything wrong, incidentally, with a minister becoming involved. We often sought ministerial involvement when there were disputes at the airport. I can recall Arnold Callan getting involved. But I would have thought if things had become so fractious at the Post Office, then the minister who would be involved would be Lawrence Skelly and his team. Not to, you know, if you like, sort of manage the dispute, but to act as a kind of honest broker in it. And I think what's missing in this dispute is an honest broker. I was quite taken by the interviews you did with postal workers yesterday, because I think it's important that their views are reflected. And I got the impression that they were thoroughly demoralised by it, that they'd arrived in this situation. There seems to be a tremendous loyalty to the Post Office from its workforce, both the union and non-union workforce, I would imagine. And, you know, I can't see that workers would want to undermine their business, and yet that's the narrative that seems to be being projected first from the Treasury Minister in Tynwald and latterly by the Post Office Board themselves. And they're all in this dispute, not just the CWU workers, but also the other trade union members and non-union members, and indeed the board themselves. At the end of the day, once the dust settles from this, they've got to carry on, and it doesn't look at the moment as if there's any sort of common ground being achieved at all.
We know that there's no more action until the new year, so we know that an offer is being looked at and a counter-offer might be put forward in the new year, and Terry Pullinger will be back for talks in the new year. How do you see, though, the dispute? Because I've seen a post by you that you say that the fight isn't being really taken to the parties it should be. It's a bit civil at the moment.
Well, for a start, I think they're commendable, to be perfectly honest, the union. We would have fought in my day a lot more dirty than this, and they are. Terry Pullinger, I think, is very sensitive to the fact that he's an officer coming in here from the UK, and he doesn't want to appear to be chucking his weight around. I think he's been very measured in his response. Now, I don't know the government misreading that as weakness, because if they are, they need to be aware of something that he said several times during this, that there was a tremendous return in that ballot, and there was a tremendous percentage of that for action.
91 and 93%.
Yeah, what that tells me is that this is a workforce that's not being led by the nose. This is a workforce that knows exactly what it's up against and what it's defending. But equally, from the comments that you garnered from the folk that one of your reporters interviewed, they seem to be willing to compromise as well. So, I mean, that's a kind of positive thing that should be built on, really, not, Alf's digging trenches, I think, to be perfectly honest, and he's not in the army anymore. I mean, we're talking here of, over 300 workers. I'm not just talking about the union and the CW, over 300 workers in that particular enterprise and their families, and that's a big commitment. And it's also an enterprise that's highly regarded in the Isle of Man, and I think people want it to get over its current difficulties and become a family again, if you like. And I don't think the kind of mood music at the moment that's coming out from government is conducive to that. Maybe they should use somebody like Chris Thomas, who's much more soothing in his mood music.
Just finally, when a dispute is resolved, it's difficult, isn't it, for everybody to come back together, I would imagine, again in an organisation.
It can be terribly difficult, and I mean, I don't keep up to speed as much with trade union matters, despite what people may think. I'm not a member of Unite now, but I mean, I do keep my ear to the ground, and the most recent dispute before this was the bus dispute, and I don't think the dust from that has settled yet. But I certainly recall from disputes that I was involved in that
there'd be latent bitterness there.
Yeah, there was often rancour, and I mean, people went through some terrible things. I mean, I can remember in one particular dispute, the brewery dispute many years ago, a fella virtually had a nervous breakdown, and I had to he went back to work, the only one, and I had to plead with the workforce eventually when he sought to be readmitted to the union to let him back in, because there was that much bitterness. I do hope that the union, Mr. Pullinger, Mr. Cannon, if he's pulling the strings, and the chair of the board, Julie Edge, can pull the strands together and they can get a settlement. But the settlement that's needed isn't one for Alf Cannon or Julie Edge or Terry Pullinger. It's a settlement that's needed for the postal workers, all the postal workers in the Isle of Man. And the other thing I'd just say is, I think that the whole Manx government approach to how it's trying to reshape its public sector workforce is, in my view, flawed. This business, which you already have in substantial areas of the public sector now, where you've got two sets of workers on two separate sets of conditions, new terms for new starters, I can see all sorts of problems in the future over that. I went down that road at MEA years ago when they used a lot of casual workers, temporary workers, on different terms and conditions, and we eventually had a dispute over it, because people will work alongside each other on different terms for a while. But I can tell you what, if I was a worker on the Department of Infrastructure now, working out on the roads at this time of year, and I was working alongside somebody else who was on much better terms and conditions, eventually I'd be banging on the door, not of the government, but of my trade union, and saying, what are you going to do about this? And I think that's going to come back to haunt us. The other thing I think is we're seeing a continual erosion of public services, from health to things like infrastructure and so on. And I think that's down to the morale of people as well. Obviously, things change, and government have proactively got to seek the sort of changes that they need. But they'll find they'll get a lot further if they try and bring the workforce with them. And at the moment, I don't think in a lot of areas of the public sector you've got the commitment that there was years ago. Fortunately, at Isle of Man Post, they do have a dedicated and loyal workforce, and despite where they're at the moment, I hope they can get back to that.
We'll put the whole interview on available for people to watch, but a lot of people will say, well, he would say all that, wouldn't he? He's a trade union man.
Well, I was a full-time official for the T&G, and obviously I empathise with working people, but I empathise with all working people, and I don't get any enjoyment about having to post rhetoric on Facebook, calling people scabs, because at the end of the day, I know they're people and they go home and they have families and they have commitments and they've had to make difficult choices and so on. But I tell you what, I'll give you a really good example. I haven't had much dealings with government in terms of trade union industrial relations, but recently I accepted an invitation from Chris Thomas to meet with himself and some colleagues about difficulties they were having over a particular area. Now, I think if you talk to Chris over that, and Chris, of course, has the overarching responsibility for most public sector workers, you'll find that the advice I gave there was that they should take a tougher line with the unions. So there you go.